I'm going to start reading from chapter 18 again, just briefly, as I start this video. It's important for you to be able to retain these words as we go through this. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Well, that sets the tone for the question. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Now, to understand the nature of the answer given, these very thorough parables have been offered. And this is so that there is no mistaking what he is talking about. And I know that still many people do not, because they don't understand what the good news is. They don't understand the gospel. But I'm going to do my best to present that gospel to you as we've been uncovering it for some time here on this channel. Anyway, let us go back to this here, and I'm going to kind of just briefly talk about these things that are underlined. Carnegie. It says it's the land of no return. Well, the land of no return is really the entirety of the underworld location in all of its variables, all of its different locations and places, spiritual and physical, are lumped up together into this one land of no return. Ishtar being called the daughter of sin. No surprise there. Sin is the Babylonian moon god, and you should remember Ishtar / Israel's connection to the moon from what we looked at in Rev 12 as it connects to Zechariah 5. To the dark house, dwelling of Urkala's god. This dark house, Urkala, is a great city. It's a great civilization. It literally means the great city. So the land of the underworld, basically Urkala, would be its physical capital, not its spiritual capital, but it would be its physical capital. This Urkala, great civilization, is underneath the earth. It's underneath the North Pole region, and we're going to talk about that a little more as we move forward. Now, who is the basic ruler of this physical Urkala great city? Who's its god? Well, that would be Nergal. Very important, because Nergal just so happens to be the god of the Danites. And if you remember a very famous Danite, Samson, in Judges chapter 14 and 15, some incredible chapters there. We even see that Samson goes into the earth. His God hollows out this inner earth cavern for him and offers him a drink from this spring or from this well. Well, we know that that spring and that well is symbolism for the Apsu, symbolism for the abyss, the bottomless pit. It's the very same well that's associated with that well of Jacob, in which Jesus Christ, in the story of the woman in the well of Samaria, is speaking out against in a very unique way that times up once again with all of this information if you've been diligently seeking what that good news was and following after the leading of the Spirit of truth. So Urkala, the physical capital underneath the earth at the North Pole, it has a ruler over it that is the god Nergal. It says that it's a house in which they can't leave. So in other words, they are bound and they are sealed there. They're deprived of light. That's going to be important because we're going to go to the Hebrew Bible and show you another place where you can see another recitation of this same type of history here. Where dust is their food. Well, the dust, it describes in Genesis that the serpent shall eat the dust of the earth all the days of his life. Now, it's just not talking about any one serpent. In all actuality, it's talking about these serpent people's descendants. And you should know that Dan, as in Samson, is an ancient mighty man, and then you should also know that Samson is a judge. You should also know that Dan, the term Dan, literally means judge, and that Jacob prophesies Dan as being a serpent judge in the last days, an adder blocking the path. And then we know that Moses sees for Dan in the last days the symbolisms of a lion's whelp leaping forth from the land of Bashan. And leaping forth from the land of Bashan is exactly the same place that we see here. The seal has been broken. They are leaping forth from this underworld land, the land of the giants. In other words, this great civilization of Ur-Kala that has these great mighty people that are considered giants. So where dust is their food, the serpent shall eat the dust all the days of their life. We know that Dan is an ancient serpent judge, also known as a mighty man. And then we know that this dust that they're eating is connected to the manna that Moses is instructing the Israelites to gather, collect, and then eat. And in some cases make these wafer cakes or these bread cakes. Well, this manna we discovered in the video series Ye Are Gods is literally gold dust that Moses and the Israelites are actually encamped around Mount Serebit, aka Mount Horeb. And Mount Horeb in modern times is called Serebit. And if you were to just briefly research the temple Hathor at Mount Serebit, you would see that they've discovered an Egyptian temple at the top of this supposed Mount Sinai. And in this temple, they have discovered metallurgist crucibles. In other words, it's a type of refinery. And they've also discovered a fine white powder, great amounts of it. And this fine white powder is consistent with the exact description that the Israelites give for this manna. They say it is a small white thing, as small as the hoarfrost. All right, and then we're going to explore this as we connect it to other things. In other words, they're describing this manna as a white powder. Well, we understand that white powder now as monatomic gold. And it's the very dust of the earth, this gold dust that these ancient mighty men are eating. Where dust is their food, clay their bread. It says they see no light, they're in darkness. Retain that, the association with the symbolisms that they're bound, no light, no darkness, this dust being their food, and then of course they're being barred with these doors and these bolts. Very, very important. Very important. All right, before we move forward to show you the comparisons in Job chapter 38, I'd like you to just kind of see some things here that you should understand if you've been following this channel. After Ishtar, the mistress, had gone down to Carnegie, no bull mounted a cow, no donkey impregnated a jenny. Now remember, who are the bulls? Those are the chief original Anunnaki, the sons of God that took unto themselves the daughters of men. Who are the cows? The cows were what they, by default, our women would be considered the cows if these gods were considered the bulls. The cows are the daughters of men. And then we see what they produce, because these cows are not of the same genetics as these bulls. They produce a genetic admixture that is now consistent with the symbolism of a donkey, which is a genetic hybrid, okay? But the real key to understand is in the name itself, the Dan key. And then if we just reverse this portion here as an anagram, we see that it really says the Nod key. And then that brings us back to Genesis, where once Cain slays his brother Abel, he goes to the land of Nod and there takes a wife. Well, the Nod are the descendancy of these sons of God that have taken unto themselves the daughters of men, and they become known as the Nodites. We see that Cain goes back to this land, and then there he takes himself a wife of Murray clay, so to say, from amongst these Nadites. Go ahead and show you something to do with the dust of the earth again. It says, I shall decree for you a fate that shall never be forgotten. Bread gleaned from the city's plows shall be your food. Bread gleaned from the city's plows shall be your food. Now, this bread is exactly what the manna is called. Okay? The manna is also a dust-like substance. So this bread that they're eating is this dust that is being taken out of the earth. In other words, in association with this meaning of the plow coming out of the earth. So the bread coming out of the earth shall be their food. In other words, that's that monatomic gold, that manna dust that's as small as the hoarfrost of heaven. Now, very important, because this is going to open us up to something else in the Bible. I cannot remember where it is right now, but you guys have heard me talk about the sleeping baker. Okay? The sleeping baker is none other than Enki. But the point here that I'm getting at is that this knowledge of how to produce this monatomic gold is coming from Enki, this master baker. But just listen and you'll understand. Similar formulation of the curse and two identical lines are found in Enkidu's curse of Shemet and Gilgamesh. The Sumerian version does not include any cursing. Cities plows, the variant, cities bakers. Now, very important if you understand in Jeremiah, where it describes the children of Israel were making these cakes unto the Queen of Heaven. They're baking these cakes unto the Queen of Heaven. Now, these cakes are like wafer cakes, and it is this monatomic gold that they're making into cake-like form, which is described by the Israelites as being sweet and tasting like honey. Well, it's the exact same way that it's described in modern terms. The monatomic gold is described as being sweet and tasting like honey. My point here is that I want you to see is that the plow is synonymous with baker, meaning that this stuff that is being made from out of the earth, that's being taken up out of the earth, the parallel is directly there. It's directly there. These bread cakes that were being made from the Queen of Heaven are being made from something that's being taken out of the earth. It's the very dust of the earth that the serpents are said to have been cursed to eat all the days of their life. Now notice here that it's talking about it in the sense of a curse, okay? Right? And then if you go back, this is what you see where it's being described as a decree of their fate. And the decree of their fate is that they're going to be eating their dust, their food from out of the ground of the earth. But you know better now that it's associated with these bread cakes that are being made to the Queen of Heaven in association with the monatomic gold. All right? Very important stuff there. Okay, so now let's go. One thing to retain here, this line about Kutha. The gatekeeper went, he opened the gate to her. Enter, my lady, may Kutha give you joy. Now, not to confuse you any further, but you're also going to see that this city, Urkala, is going to be called Kutha. But there's also a land, Kutha, that is above ground also, and we'll kind of read a little bit more about that. But nonetheless, this Kutha above ground is basically the main worship center for the underworld deities in Mesopotamia, and it's also associated with Dan. Okay, let me go ahead and read a little bit here about Kuth or Kutha. Place names with two spellings in Hebrew and English. Kutha was the center of worship of Nergal, god of death in Mesopotamia. Residents of the city were exiled by the Assyrians to live in Israel. Once settled, they made an idol to worship Nergal, thus aggravating the tendency to worship Yahweh of Israel along with other gods. Kuth was located at Tel Abrium, about 18 miles northeast of Babylon. All right, very, very important here. Not only do we see that this Kutha place associated with the center of worship for Nergal, we see Nergal is given the title of God of Death. Now, I've told you that Nergal is actually really the Dans themselves in their more truthful description of them. Okay? Nergal is the locust. Nergal is this living descendancy of these ancient mighty ones that is underneath the North Pole in this great city of Urkala. And he is considered the god of death. Now that's going to be very important, because what we're trying to figure out is how this times up with the Hebrew Bible. And as you see, the Hebrew Bible is chock full of this information, which should now make sense for what I have previously taught you guys. This is going to be chapter 6 of the book of Revelation. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Very important. So who's the pale horse, right? Who's the pale horse? Just like you see on the Iraqi dinar, which is everything that is encoded of the false word in the Hebrew Bible from their God, everything to do with their Sumerian mythos and then prophecies that originate from it. Here we see the pale horse Dan right there for you, the god of death. And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death. Now they even fulfill even further, because we know that first the Dans are going to show, and then they prepare the way for the arrival of their king Apollyon, aka Enki, the Nahesh, that serpent. So we see that Dan, being the god of death, or Nergal, the god of death, prepares the way for hell, and we know that that is Apollyon. In Revelation chapter 9, we see that the locusts have a king over them, and it would be this hell, because we know the locusts are spewing what out their mouths? Fire, smoke, and brimstone. Oh, that's the doctrines of death, or in other words, the doctrines of hell, the doctrines of Enki. But of course, these doctrines are laced in such a way that it's going to sound pleasant. It's going to sound like everything that everybody's already trying to teach you now, this ye are gods temptation, and to believe yourself is a god, which means now you reject Jesus Christ. And that's what breaking the seal is all about. So that's the trick of it, to get you to call yourself a god. By that colossal sin, by default, you are rejecting Jesus Christ. And then that allows them to override now your free will, because you're no longer protected by the living seal of God Almighty that is quoted to be in the foreheads of his believers in Revelation chapter 9. All right? Very important. Very important. So we see that this horse rider, which is consistent with the army of Joel 2 riding horses, Jeremiah even calls them the horses of Dan. He says, and the snorting of the horses of Dan, when he's describing these invaders, this army of the north, of these strange people in the last days. Well, in Revelation, they are quoted as being connected to pale, in other words, fair skin, just like I said, this Nordic type Aryan race, and they're also considered to be this death god that's riding them. You know, there's many people that are going to try to steer you guys wrong on that, but the evidence, they've got none, because the evidence is right here. It's right here. All right, now what we got to do is go back to the book of Daniel. And just briefly, I want you to see here this line, wet with the dew of heaven. We know that the manna was considered to fall with the dew of heaven, right, in Exodus. And then we know that it's also considered to be called the hoar frost of heaven in Job chapter 38. And then we also see that the Israelites also liken it to the hoar frost also. They say it's a small, round thing as small as the hoar frost. So very important, this dew of heaven is the hoar frost of heaven, and it's associated with giving them this symbolic description of eagle's feathers or bird-like creatures. Very important. Now I'd like to go back to Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38 is basically going to be another view into this event, another view into this sealing and binding that is going to describe a lot more information as to who they are and what the nature of this is really all about. So let me go ahead and read this in full for a period, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? There's many that do. Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measure thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened, or who had laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. All right, lines 1 through 7 is talking about an ancient, pre-civilized man civilization. And it is describing these sons of God that had not yet rebelled, that were in perfect accord with these morning stars, because the morning stars had not yet rebelled and brought the sons of God into this fall. So the morning stars represent high spirit orders of creation, of which our planetary prince is one, of which Satan is one, of which Lucifer is one, and of which many are of this order of the morning stars. But out of the groupings of these morning stars, we see that some of these spirit sons have rebelled. Basically, they carry with them into rebellion the sons of God, or a portion of them on this world. Our planetary prince, who you see me title as Inky, in other words, this Nahesh, this serpent, our planetary prince is the one who is responsible for guiding these sons of God during their work in bringing about the inauguration of civilization on our world. And as we see in Ezekiel chapter 28, everything was going fine for a period of time until this iniquity was found in them. So then they rebel. So from lines 1 to 7 is pre-rebellion, that they're all working together, they're working for the benefit of mankind, and at the same time you have to realize these sons of God are living in physical civilizations. These physical civilizations are where people are confused when they look back in history and they think that mankind has had some sort of golden age, when in all actuality mankind has never had a golden age. The age that you're looking to is this age from lines 1 through 7, and it's a product of the sons of God, not mankind. The sons of God are not men, and it is said many times over in the Bible. The sons of God are spirit beings that have been materialized into physical bodies to do this work, to help bring about man into a civilization that would travel the correct direction away from the material sciences and into the spiritual truths, which would really ultimately be the quest or the goal of our civilization, spiritual truth. Well, by contrast, we see that the rebellion has brought the opposite. It has brought material bondage, and in which people are becoming blinded in the material shadow, and they're no longer able to recognize the spiritual truths. All of that's a part of rebellion. All of that is a part of what the serpent needed to do so that he could get the world to this state of confusion, so he could get people to present himself as God, so that people would will him in, the seal could be broken, and then he can enter into this dominion. Okay? So there really never was a golden age of man. Mankind has always been on a forward struggle in progress from the beginnings of his creation till now. But there was ancient civilizations that were highly advanced that these sons of God did create before and after the rebellion. We see that after the rebellion, the civilizations that they start making, at least the fallen ones, are temples to this serpent that you see quoted in Genesis as being responsible for some of these actions. Now, very important here, we go from lines 1 through 7, pre-rebellion. Line 8 instantly jumps us into the rebellion. It says, or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of a womb. Very important, because the question is asking now, who has shut them up? Okay, describing them being shut up as the sea. Now here's the key for understanding what the sea is. The sea is these ancient mighty ones. Sea in biblical terms literally means a chaotic, unruly mass of wild peoples. Or who shut up the sea? Who shut up these unruly mass of chaotic, wild asses, wild onagers, Job chapter 24. Okay? Who shut up this unruly mass of peoples with doors? Over the door and the bolt, dust has settled. They've been shut up, right? The very same thing. Or who shut up the sea, okay? Which you could term also as being what we're talking about with these Danites, who were supposed to be released as these end-time judges, being described symbolically as serpents, and also lions' whelps that leap forth from the land of giants. Now it describes that once this sea breaks forth, it's going to break forth like it's issued out of a womb. Very, very intriguing, at least to me. And I'm going to show you why. Give me one moment. This is that drawing I did some 20 years ago. Many of you guys know what it's about. If just search my playlist to find things about it so that you can learn more about it. Nonetheless, I've since learned that an inverted triangle is a symbolism not only for female energy, but also for the womb itself. And in this drawing, Spirit of Truth gave me already what the truth of all this is about, okay? The birthing of the New World Order, the birthing of this Dark Prince, and then out of it, what do we see coming? Well, the first thing that we see here, we see these reptilian-like creatures, all right? And I did not know what any of this meant in the beginning, but I have since learned what it does now. This represents that first faked alien invasion that we're hearing so much about. That's going to be associated with the gray aliens, aka loosely affiliated with this reptilian business. And this is what they're going to want you to believe is the fulfillment of the locust. It's not, okay? Because the locusts are supposed to have long hair like women. This is consistent with the Dans. This is consistent with Nergal. It's consistent with Samson, this ancient mighty one with this long hair, and for a bunch of other reasons. But they need to trick and fool you. So the first thing they're going to send after the millstone will be this gray alien faction that they want you to believe is perfectly connected to the Satanic USA. And they've already fulfilled that by producing the Roswell thing in 1947. Everybody knows, or supposedly everybody knows, that the USA has taken the satanic alien technology. It's a part of getting people to believe that God after these reptilian-like creatures coming out, the fakers, we see these angelic-like winged beings coming out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 type appendages. Well, I never knew what any of that meant. It was just stuff I was just drawing, you know, as being inspired. And now we know that the Pleiades is associated with 7. We know that the chakras are associated with 7. We know that these beings will be illuminated with this knowledge of the rising Kundalini up the chakra. This is symbolism for them. This is symbolism for these Dans that want to be seen as these Elohim. They're associated with these angels that are associated, as they want you to believe, with the power of God that gives them the right to smite, destroy, and judge. All right, it's all right there. And notice that it's coming out of a womb, of an inverted triangle. Unreal. And then you should understand the symbolisms in the latest video series that we've looked at that shows that in all sorts of things. It shows it in the movie Field of Dreams. It shows it in the movie Night of the Comet. And it shows it in all sorts of other things. It shows it in the Sinai Peninsula, where the Temple Cerebit is, in the wilderness, where the children of Israel were lost in the wilderness for 40 years. And they're eating that dust, right? They're eating that manna. Well, the Sinai Peninsula is perfectly shaped like an inverted triangle, and at the same time, the water masses around it are shaped like an open serpent's mouth. I might show that later in the series. All right, now you see that it's connected, that they are bound, this sea, this chaotic mass of unruly people, in other words, the army of Joel 2, are bound. But when they come out, they're going to come out like they're being issued out of a womb. Okay, there's going to be tribulation, there's going to be travail, there's going to be wailing, there's going to be weeping, there's going to be moaning and gnashing of teeth. It says, when I made the cloud the garment thereof, and a thick darkness a swaddling band for it. All right, let's not forget, okay, they see no light, they dwell in darkness. The very same thing. And break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors. Very interesting. Very interesting. It could not be any more consistent. Over the door and the bolt. The bar. Same thing. Bolt, bar. Okay? Over the door and the bolt, dust has settled. And break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors. And said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further. And there shall thy proud waves be stayed. Now remember, it says, these are the children of pride. And then we get a lions, a grouping of lions, a family of lions is called a pride. And then you see that these beings are considered to be fallen. And it's because in connection to their pride. Pride comes before the fall. Now they're being considered these proud waves. It's the very same thing. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the wicked, take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. We'll come back to that. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Wow, the high arm shall be broken. Well, we've heard about this high arm before being in association with Ephraim, and the high arm that's going to be broken is Ephraim's arm from the moon. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Well, we know that Samson did. Or hast thou walked in search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Well, for Ishtar it's being quoted they have. Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? All right, there's much, much more to look at. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born? or because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Well, let's think about material treasures and a cold place. What's the first thing going to pop into your head? Santa Claus, North Pole. And Santa Claus rightly associated with Satan Claus. Santa Claus's colors are red and white, are they not? So, hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? These treasures of the snow are consistent with a great civilization of great material wealth underneath the North Pole. Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? Now this flip-flops over to what actually brings them about, and that's going to be this hail fire from the sky. But you also got to understand that that is double. That's double. That they bring about a false fire from the sky, but in all actuality, they're going to suffer the wrath of their own actions, and that they also are going to experience a repercussion from this fire from the sky. Very important. It says, he that will kill with the sword must be killed with the sword. Okay? And then let us go to verse 29. Out of whose womb came the ice? Now, once again, talking about a womb, talking about something very cold coming out of this womb in association with this ice. And it's going to be the North Pole. And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. The face of the deep, the face of the abyss, the face of this great city Urkala is frozen. Well, it would be the ice mass that is presently melting above the North Pole. Out of whose womb came the ice? Well, you should understand ancient legends that also call these beings ice giants or frost giants. And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? Who hath birthed it? Who hath birthed it out of the womb? Okay, so when we also get gendered, it also means to produce or to create. So who also created the hoarfrost, this golden manna of heaven, which is also associated with these supposed golden ones that you see now being affiliated with ice giants or frost giants? Now, they've put a big spin on who these ice giants and who these frost giants are to get you to believe that there's something other than these Nordic ones that are associated with the North and ice. And that would be in that movie Thor. But that's just them trying to confuse everyone. And if you're basing your truths off of Hollywood movies, who the very people are that are in these occults that are spinning these things, you're lost. You're lost. Don't do it, because that stuff is a part of the deception. So now we get, let's just look one more time. I should explain this further. It says, the waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. All right, the waters. The waters are an association with the abysmal waters, and they're being hid with the stone. So the waters represent the location where these chaotic mass of peoples are actually being held up at, okay? But it also represents the knowledge, okay? It represents this abysmal well in which this knowledge is springing up from. So we got to understand, who is this stone that is hiding these waters, to understand what the nature of these waters are. Well, in Genesis chapter 49, Ephraim is described, or the descendants of Joseph, and we know that Ephraim is lifted up as the chief descendant. We see that Ephraim was considered to be the stone of Israel, which makes sense, because if Ephraim was to be that high arm on the moon that was throwing the millstone, Ephraim is the stone, or is symbolized with the stone, the millstone that's being thrown, because he's the stone of Israel, okay? They're being used as the false witnesses to bring these plagues upon our world. So it says the waters are hid as with a stone. So Ephraim, the subversive, secret, mystery religion societies, is hiding where they're getting the source of their abysmal waters from. And at the same time, they are hiding the source or the place location of this physical great city known as Urkala, that is being symbolized as this face of the deep, the face of the abyss is frozen. So if we want to understand who is being bound or loosed in association with this entire binding and loosing that has been laid out before you, it simply says it in line 31. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Very important. So we're going to see that this binding and loosing is associated with constellational star names, one being Pleiades at this point and the other being Orion. And then it goes forth to this. And these supposed Orion ones, they're the same. They're the same. And that there's a huge confusion that goes on about this to get you to somehow believe that these beings are coming from other planets, when in all reality, they come from the spiritual abode. They've just been materialized into a material form here. Okay, and then they have rejected and rebelled against that work, and then by default now they are going to be sealed so that they cannot overrun our planet until a particular mercy time has been allotted to them. Okay, until that they can see that the equational route of their choosing has led them to the equational abyss and has brought nothing but chaos, and that once they basically are allowed to run the full course, the Father is expecting them to see by experience that the choosing that they have taken has bankrupted them, that they are bankrupt spiritually, morally, and if they don't watch it at this point, eternally. Understand that. All right, before we move forward, I'm going to show you a connection with this Orion, or the Iron Cross. And remember the crossing of genetics from the bulls to the cows to produce the Don Keys. This is where we get the Iron Cross from. It is in symbolization with the Orion Cross. All right, let's look at verse 9 through 12 briefly. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib? Now keep this in mind. This is all in a consistent tone here with everything that we have just read. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow? With his band, band also means troop or army, as in army of Joel 2. Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him, because his strength is great? Or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into the barn? Incredible. Because this begins to bring us to the parable of the wheat and the tares. Once again, the words of Jesus Christ, that is describing that first Satan seeks to sift the wheat. And then you see here that we see these symbolic unicorns are being asked, or you're being asked if you're going to trust these unicorns. Are you going to trust them? Okay? Are you going to leave all of your labor, your world to them, your dominion? Okay? Are you just going to give it up? Are you going to trust these deceivers? Are you going to believe them? That he's going to bring home thy seed and gather it into the barn. Well, we know that the barn for them is the moon, and that the seed is the remnant in Rev 12. Okay? Or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into the barn? Wow. Some very serious questions are being asked to false Israel. And unfortunately, many of them are believing these unicorns. All right. Retain this portion here. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Basically in association with everything that we have read thus far. I'm going to go ahead and read from chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, and I'm going to read one verse, 43. And whereas thou sawest iron, Orion, And wherein thou sawest iron mixed with murray clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Wow. Very important. So we can easily see in Job 38 who can loose the bands of Orion is really in connection to these supposed iron ones. These iron ones, iron means strong, okay? Mighty. In other words, it's these ancient mighty ones that are being considered as these rods of iron that have the right to bear rule. But in all actuality, they don't. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the murray clay. Now here's important once we come up to the murray clay. The murray clay is telling you something. It's not just telling you mixed with the clay. It's mixed with the murray clay. Murray means muddy. Murray means dirty. So when it says, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the dirty or the muddy clay, it says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Now who is that? That would be the daughters of men that were chosen, that were now given that description symbolically as cows. They're also considered whores, because we know that Ishtar herself is considered simultaneously a virgin and a whore. Well, that would be because these daughters of men that were chosen from amongst the virgins, and then they were made whores once they mated, or they were made dirty once they mated with these fallen sons of God. This is the whole origin of how Ishtar can be dual from virgin to whore. It's because of how the daughters of men were selected as virgins and then made dirty whores, at least in the eyes of the people of those days, when they consummated a union with these fallen sons of God. Okay? So this murray clay ends up being the dirty whore daughters of men that were chosen. Now that's not my words, but it's how the symbolism with Ishtar being considered the whore or the harlot. All right? So it opens it up to you guys. It's telling you that only a portion of mankind has admixed themselves, and that it was never to be, but it was a portion of mankind that was considered this dirty portion that links us up directly to these daughters of men. Okay? Very important. So the iron are these Anunnaki, these original ancient mighty ones that have chosen to themselves the virgin daughters of men, and by default made them be perceived as dirty harlots. All right, there's more that goes into that, and we just have to build this up in layers to understand it. Now, if we were to take the bands of iron, or the bands of Orion that you saw in Job 38, and then now you're seeing in Daniel 2:43 it not being described as Orion any longer, you're getting back to its original root, to this iron that's associated to these mighty and strong ones. Now I'd like you to see that you are seeing the same thing described here, just in a different way. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, Urkala, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast in the grass of the earth. All right, so you get, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing, just being given different symbols to describe it, which is what unfortunately has the ability to confuse so many people. And that's one reason why a lot of these fake truth channels have a leg up on so many people, is because they know that you guys have been preoccupied for so long that it's going to take time to get this down. And if they can keep swaying you from an understanding of something that I'm attempting to offer you, then they can further control you and control this flow of knowledge from the wolf source and not the source of truth. Look at this here. What does this say here? This is the Great Seal of the USA. We know that the USA is associated with Ephraim, and then Ephraim is associated with these secret societies, these fraternal orders of Freemasonry, basically brought out of the origins from the Knight Templars. And we know that the Knight Templars get their knowledge from underneath the Temple of Solomon, of which is left the artifacts of false Israel. They leave their occultic artifacts hidden underneath the Temple of Solomon. It's recorded in 2 Samuel, I think, where it describes the children of Israel did put away Ashtaroth and Baal. We know that the Knights Templar. And then we see that now there's a rebirthing of this occultic Israelite-based shadow mystery knowledge that is being brought back out into our world, not necessarily from the actual Israelites or Jews themselves, but from a people who are not Jews but say they are. And then now that would be represented by the nations of the world that are united as being the lost 10 tribes of Israel more philosophically than they are by heritage, by heredity, or genetic descendancy. So the great work of Ephraim is to break the seal, and it's completely within his great seal right here, all perfectly associated with the tetrahedron that is further associated with the blue, the water word, which is now also described as the abysmal waters, of which they are also bound in. So the chaotic mass of peoples, which is this sea, are basically chaotic peoples that cannot accept the peaceful truth of the living waters, but instead they have to make these waters some type of disastrous type storm. They've got to make everything chaotic. They've got to create their order from creating some sort of chaos. In other words, that's a way of them just trying to erase the order that already was before with chaos, so that they can create a new world order of which is going to be based upon their dominion and not ours. All right, there's so much to see here. The symbol with the eagle that we see in Rev 12, the symbolism with the bars, the symbolisms with Northern Israel's colors of red and white, everything else that everybody else is already familiar with. The torn olive branch symbolizes non-belief. But what you might not be familiar with is what you see in the circle that goes around. Those are going to be the two colors of Dan. Yellow and black represents Dan, and for good reason, because yellow and black represents the bee. And then Dan's symbol, at least within the insect world, is the bee, along with the locust. So being that we see the seal being associated here, yellow and black that goes around it is in perfect connection with who's going to come out of this seal once it's broken. It's going to be this hive mind. It's going to be this swarm. Just like in the army of Joel 2, it describes them basically acting together in one accord, that they move in one accord. They're not going to sway from basically their actions. They're each going to follow after each other. There's going to be an army type ranking about these beings. So the yellow and black also is going to be described right here. Black is the color of iron, and then yellow is the color of brass. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass. All right, there's your band of iron and brass that is associated with the great work of bringing about these beings, this supposed super race that you even see Hitler himself was involved in this occultic work to bring these beings about. And then if you should understand anything about Project Paperclip in the United States, you should know that the United States has absorbed all of their rocket scientists and at the same time their occultic philosophies and aspirations. But in reality, the U.S. and Nazi Germany have been working together the whole time. Even before we absorbed their scientists, it's been an agenda that's being run by a hidden hand the whole time. They are all working together, and they have been for thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years. All right, so if you now let me show you something here. We'll bring this video to a close. It was a lot of information to absorb. Remember this. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with murry clay, with dirty clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. This will be just a little further down in the book of Matthew, chapter 18. And as you see, he's going to be talking consistently about everything that I just showed you was connected. And then listen to chapter 19, starting here at verse 3. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall twain be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Keep in mind as he describes here about this cleaving, and as you can understand, it's the same thing that is described here, but it describes that these shall not cleave to one another. And this is going to be important when you want to understand in the book of Hosea how it describes that Ephraim, as I saw Tyrus, was planted in a pleasant place, and he shall bring his children to the murderer. In other words, they are not going to cleave to one another. They're going to separate themselves. Now, there's a meaning in this cleaving that has everything to do with genetic descendancy that we'll talk about. But there's also a higher variable form that links up to Zechariah 11:17 that describes, Woe to the idle shepherd, who shall leaveth the flock. Okay? You'll just have to kind of wait to see how this kind of plays out further. But I want you to see now that everything that we've talked about is consistent. We're talking about the same thing that Jesus Christ is talking about, and he is giving us some incredible information. He's given us the foundation of truth so that we can understand this, and that we can understand and destroy these racist doctrines that are being taught out of the Hebrew Bible. If you guys have not realized that the majority of racism that is sprouting up on YouTube is being backed by supposed scriptures out of the Hebrew Bible. People that cannot correctly divide a word and that don't want you to be able to are using all this stuff about Jacob, Esau, and Edom to justify murder and death and racism in God's name. And I'm telling you that if you can begin to follow and understand what Jesus Christ is telling you, he is going to completely destroy this supposed racist doctrine that can be validated by some sort of proclamation of God, not his father, and in reality, not your father either. So there is a whole lot more to take in, but at this point, I just want you guys to go a little further.